Hey everybody, it's your old pal Tristan here, and today we are going to be talking about the Hammer Dracula series. Hammer films in general have been kind of elusive in North America. Like, they were always available on DVD and VHS, but they haven't quite made the transition to high definition. And I've been watching over the past year or so as companies like Warner Archive or Scream Factory have been sort of going down and checking off the list. And I'm like, there's still a few that are missing, some essentials. We are far from having a comprehensive collection over here in North America, but it's finally at the point that you can be like, hey, let's go watch all the Hammer Dracula movies, or we're almost at the point where we can be like, let's watch all the Hammer Frankenstein movies. And it's been fun because I've seen all these movies before, but broken up. I saw one here, one there. And now to finally have sort of a comprehensive collection, even though it's broken up between different video labels. So I can be like, hey, let's marathon the Hammer Dracula movies. Let's watch them all from beginning to end. And that's kind of what I've been doing. So this seems like the perfect time to sort of highlight the series and give my thoughts, recommendations, that sort of thing. Because I grew up watching the Universal horror movies. When I was in my teens, there was a movie channel up here in Canada called MPix, and one Halloween, their theme was vampires. The whole month of October, it was nothing but vampire movies, covering the whole history of cinema. And that was where I got my first exposure to Hammer movies. And it kind of blew my mind. It was one of those things where, like, I was never truly scared. It's not like these things gave me nightmares or made me want to look around the corner. But I was following the natural progression that film audiences would have done back in the day. And it's kind of funny because in much the same way that Frankenstein was the flagship franchise for Universal, Dracula became the flagship franchise for Hammer. This is mainly due to Christopher Lee in the title role. Prior to this, Lugosi, that is what everyone thought about when they thought of vampires. And although Christopher Lee's version doesn't deviate too much, he is much more predatory. He's much more animalistic. This isn't the suave sort of drawing room villain. He plays it like a predator. When you watch him, there's something about him that feels dangerous. It's not as manipulative as Lugosi's Dracula. He's not someone who weaves himself into the lives of his victims. He is someone who just simply goes for the jugular. He stands outside of society looking in. I think one of the other things about the Hammer films that made them seem a little bit more edgy than what came before is also the titles. You know, you had things like the Satanic Rites of Dracula or Taste the Blood of Dracula. You know, compare that to Universal where it's like, son of, daughter of, house of. It's like, oh, very... It sounds like you're talking about the nuclear family. But when you go to the Hammer films, it's like, yeah, evil! It's like, so awesome. If you're looking for a place to start, because there are a lot of these films, Horror of Dracula, the first film, or Dracula as it's known in the UK, is one of those essentials in the history of horror. And it's very linear, it's very basic, it establishes all the tropes and all the window dressing that would come to be standard in these movies. The other thing I love about it and all of the sequels is that they have this, and this is something that goes for Hammer in general, is it feels like autumn perpetual. Like, these are great movies to throw on in October because they just reek of the autumn atmosphere. I think it's something to do with being made in the UK. It gets that chilly atmosphere that gets under your skin. It doesn't have to be like the fog and cobwebs that you see in the other Gothic movies. There's just something about them that feels like the fall season. The first sequel, Brides of Dracula, is really interesting because there's no brides and there's no Dracula. But it follows Van Helsing as he goes after another vampire. So it's set within the same world. This is a sequel, but it runs in a completely different direction, just playing with the mythology. And it's actually one of the better vampire movies that Hammer made. Hammer's Dracula series tends to overshadow all of the other vampire movies, like Kiss of the Vampire and The Vampire Lovers, all these sort of great blood-drenched films. And the thing I love about Brides of Dracula is just how classic it feels. You got the carriages, you got the scared townspeople at the tavern, you got a beautiful, beautiful leading lady who you are just rooting for the entire time. And you got a villain who is pure fucking evil. The only complaint I really have about it is that it wraps up really quickly. The climax is awesome, but it's like, oh, ending, here's the credits, boom, gone. Dracula Prince of Darkness was the first sequel that brought Christopher Lee back, and it is really well done. It's got a lot of atmosphere and a lot of tension and some of the most iconic images out of the franchise, but for me it kind of drags. I really do like it. I like it for individual moments or visuals or character beats, but it just doesn't really do it for me. I do enjoy it, but it's not one of my favorites. Dracula Has Risen from the Grave, which I fucking love that title. I love it because it has another one of those great Michael Ripper performances. Michael Ripper, if you've seen my Night Creatures review, he was one of those supporting players that Hammer had, who sometimes got a chance to play a bigger role from time to time. Usually he only did bits and walk-ons, but here he plays a pastry chef, and the main character, Paul, is his apprentice. And he's absolutely hilarious in it.
You're a second-class pastry cook. And if you work hard, you may in time become a first-class pastry cook.
It's one of these movies that when I was first exploring the franchise, my brother actually shared these with me. It's one of those movies that endeared Michael Ripper to me as an actor. He's just so entertaining to watch in anything he's doing. And he's one of those guys that you can tell gave his all, even when he had nothing to do and was there for one day. So that's one of the reasons why I love that movie.
You pathetic, spineless fools. You drink then! You drink it! You drink the filth!
Taste the Blood of Dracula. Now we're really talking. This might be my personal favorite of the entire franchise. I don't know if it's necessarily the most popular or well thought of. It focuses on these three guys who are essentially upstanding members of the community. They are very well thought of, but they have this dark secret where once a month they go out together for a night of debauchery. You know, they go to whorehouses, they gamble, they drink, they do all these sinful, terrible things. And then they start to get bored by it, and they fall in with a guy who you think is a Satanist at first, looking to summon the devil. He's played by Ralph Bates, and he's absolutely awesome in this movie. And the payoff is that he's actually looking to revive Dracula.
They have destroyed my servant. They will be destroyed.
And because these three men end up killing him and then trying to keep their dirty second life a secret, Dracula then singles them out and picks them off one by one. This is like from the time when Christopher Lee didn't want to be a part of these movies, where Hammer basically had to bully him into appearing in them. And you can tell because of how absent Dracula is from the plot, but he is more of a force of nature in this movie. He is the sort of all-seeing eye, the sort of judgment, and there is a payoff at the end. But yeah, I just love that one. The way it looks, the way it's acted, the whole setup with the three guys. It's an awesome movie. As you get into the 1970s, Scars of Dracula is okay. This was an attempt at a sort of soft reboot, but it's kind of like, it's just more of the same. It's not really bad, it's not really good, it's just kind of there. Dracula AD 1972 is one of those movies you either hate or love. I absolutely love it because it was an attempt to update the franchise, get a little bit more hip with the kiddies. So it moves it firmly into 1970s London. You got all this partying and funky shit going on, but there's still the gothic window dressing. You have that great prologue, and then there's this cemetery scene that is just dripping with the old school atmosphere. Plus, you got Carolyn Monroe in it, so you can't really complain about that.
Foolish man. A bullet cannot harm me.
A silver bullet, Dracula.
Titanic Rites of Dracula is another one that it's just kind of there. They were trying to do some different things with the plot and sort of espionage type shit. And it did feel like there was an air of finality about it. Like they were trying to close out the franchise. But again, after the previous movie, it just seems kind of like there's a loss of energy there. And then sometimes people count it, sometimes people don't. Legend of the Seven Golden Vampires.
Strike in their hearts!
This was a movie that Hammer did in conjunction with the Shaw Brothers from Hong Kong. And it's basically Van Helsing versus vampires with Kung Fu. Christopher Lee refused to come back. He was absolutely done at this point. And it doesn't really acknowledge continuity too much. But it's a fun, cheesy 70s drive-in sort of ride. You can't really go wrong with vampires and kung fu.
Who dares to disturb the sanctity of Dracula?
Yeah, Dracula in these movies, he's kind of like the heavy. He's the juggernaut. He's what Frankenstein was in the 40s and Jason was in the 80s. He's the monster that you enjoy watching get fucked up at the end of every movie and then figure out how they're going to bring him back in the sequel. He's the sort of unstoppable force that you just throw everything at.
Please try and understand. This is not Lucy, the sister you loved. It's only a shell, possessed and corrupted by the evil of Dracula.
Peter Cushing's also really good as Van Helsing. Like, we mainly associate him with the Frankenstein films that he headlined, but that air of authority that he brings, he's probably one of, if not the best Van Helsings that we've ever had in cinema. And because of that middle portion of the series where he was absent, where it was just Christopher Lee as Dracula, you kind of forget how many of these movies he's actually in. So those are my thoughts on the Hammer Dracula films. These aren't something I grew up on. I don't have a lot of heavy nostalgia for them outside of Horror of Dracula. I didn't really get into them until my early 20s when my brother started sharing them with me. But they are a lot of fun. They are great, great time capsules of their time. Like, this is exploitation cinema before there was something like exploitation cinema. If you want blood, tits, Dracula stabbing a girl to death with a knife for no apparent reason, these are the movies for you. So give them a watch, whether you start at the beginning or pick a random one. Just look into them, because these are great, great movies. And finally, they are all available in high def in North America. So there's no excuse. Anyways, that's going to wrap it up for today. If you like this video, be sure to like and subscribe, and I'll see you all next time.